So you know what they did with Jesus? They arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then they took him to the Sanhedrin. In other words, he had his religious trial. Notice Matthew chapter 26 and verse 57. Matthew 26 and verse 57. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were what? Were assembled. Let me ask you, was his trial a religious trial or was his trial a political trial? His trial, first of all, was a religious trial. And by the way, it was a travesty in justice. Let me mention some of the things that they did which were against Jewish law. Number one, they employed false witnesses. That was forbidden by Jewish law. They had a trial at night. That was forbidden by Jewish law. They slapped Jesus before they pronounced the sentence against him. That was a violation of Jewish law. He had right to counsel. They did not give him the right to counsel. That was a violation of Jewish law. They made him self-incriminate himself. That was a violation of Jewish law. In fact, the trial, according to Jewish law, had to be public, and they made it private. And furthermore, it was forbidden by Jewish law to have any trial or any sentencings on Friday, Saturday, or a feast day. And they violated that. In other words, it was a travesty in justice. What the Sanhedrin, what the church did when Jesus was taken before the religious leaders. Now let's notice a little bit about this trial. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 59. 26 verse 59. Now the chief priests, by the way, another regulation of the Jews was that they had to have impartial judges. Notice what it says here. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it up in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing?" See, that what they're doing is an inquisition, aren't they? I know we're probably not used to using that word in this context, but they're doing an inquiry. That's what the word inquisition means. Notice verse 62. And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And when Jesus said those words, immediately they pronounced the death sentence. Let me ask you, who pronounced the death sentence? Was it the civil power or was it the religious power? It was the religious power. The Inquisition was made in the church governing body. And the sentence of death was dictated in the church governing body. I want you to remember these details because we're going to come back to them when we talk about the beast and when we talk about the land beast. Notice what we find in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 66. After they did the inquisition, after they did the inquiry, it says, "Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, 'He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?' They answered and said, 'He is deserving of what? Death.'" Who pronounced the death sentence? The state or the church? The church pronounced the death sentence. They were the ones who did the inquisition. They were the ones who led Jesus to incriminate himself. But the problem is that the church of that day and age could not execute the death penalty. They pronounced the sentence, but the church as a church could not do it. So what did they do? They took Jesus to the political ruler of Rome. Notice Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 and 2. Matthew 27, 1 and 2. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to whom? To Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now, was Pilate the civil ruler or religious ruler? He was the civil ruler. Could the church execute the death penalty on Jesus without the help of the state? Absolutely not. They needed the help of the civil power. Now, when they take him to Jesus, notice John chapter 18 and verse 30. John 18, verse 29 and verse 30. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. He's an evildoer." Let me ask you, had he violated any of the civil laws of Rome? He had not violated any of the civil laws of the state. In fact, do you know that Pilate had the separation of church and state much clearer than even the Jews did? Notice John 18 and verse 31. Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." How many laws did Pilate recognize? How many? 2. He says, "I got my law, which is the civil code of Rome, but you take this man and you judge him by what? By your law, which is religious law." In other words, Pilate is recognizing that there are how many kingdoms? 2 kingdoms. His has a law, which is civil law, and they have a law, which is religious law, because they've accused Jesus of transgressing the first table of the law. But you see, the Jews, they wanted to put him to death, and they needed the help of the state in order to put him to death. This is what the Bible calls fornication. When the church uses the state to slay those who are not in harmony with her teachings. Notice John chapter 18 and verse 31. Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone," what? "To death. We need your help, Pontius Pilate, to put this man to death." Notice Luke 23 and verse 2. It says, "And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.'" Let me ask you, was this an accusation that would have raised the ears of Pontius Pilate? Oh, absolutely. They say, this man wanted to be a king. And he said we're not supposed to pay taxes, which is an open, blatant lie, because we already read that Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." He said, "Pay taxes." So this is an outright lie. And they're saying, this man said that he's a king. But they're twisting his words, because Jesus had not said that he was going to be a political king, but he was king of the kingdom of grace, of a religious system. And so Pilate calls Jesus in, and he wants to have an interview with him. He wants to ask him if he's a king. Notice John 18, verse 36. When Pilate says, "Are you a king?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world." How many kingdoms did Jesus recognize? His, and what other one? This world's kingdom. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world." If my kingdom were of this world, in other words, if mine was a political kingdom, what would his servants do? My servants would what? Would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. Are you understanding what's happening here? Jesus is recognizing 2 kingdoms. One is the civil power, and the other is his spiritual kingdom. And he's saying, I came to represent the spiritual kingdom. I did not come to take over the political system. Notice John 18, verse 37. Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I'm a king." He says, "Yeah, you bet I am. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should kill everybody with a sword and take over the world." That's not what he says. What kind of kingdom did he come to establish? He says, "I have come into the world that I should bear witness to the what? To the truth." That's something spiritual, folks. Everyone who is of the truth hears what? My voice. And by the way, do you know that 3 times Pontius Pilate goes out and he says to the people, "I've examined him. I don't find any crime in this man." Did Pilate understand that Jesus was not saying that he was going to be a king to take over the political system? Did he understand that? Listen, if he didn't understand that, he would have had Jesus killed right there. But he didn't, because he knew that Jesus was not a political king like the Jews accused him of being. In fact, 3 times Pilate said that Jesus was innocent, that he was delivering to death an innocent man. That's a travesty and justice. Notice John chapter 18, verse 38. This is the first time. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. In other words, this man is innocent. Once again in John 19 and verse 4, Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. That's twice. Notice John 19 and verse 6. 3 is the charm. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. Did Pilate openly announce that Jesus was innocent of violation of any law of Rome, of the civil power? Yes. But the Jews said, this guy violated the first table of the law. By the way, Jesus had not, but they're accusing him of doing that. And they want to use the civil power of Rome to destroy Jesus because of the convictions of his conscience, because of his religious views. In fact, notice John chapter 19 and verse 7. The Jews answered him, We have a law. It might not be yours, they're saying to Pilate, but we have a law. And according to our law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. And Pilate says, and what does that have to do with me? Making himself like God, that's the first table of the law. Of course, he doesn't say this, but he says that has to do with you, with the spiritual kingdom, not with me. You know, show me that he killed somebody, or he committed adultery, or he stole, or he dishonored or trampled upon his parents, or that he's guilty of witnessing falsely against people. Give me one of those violations of civil law, but don't come to me and say that he made himself God, because that has to do with your law. It doesn't have to do with mine. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Now notice John 19 verse 11. Did Pilate and Jesus both recognize that there are two kingdoms? Absolutely. Notice John 19:11. Because Pilate says, don't you know that I could release you if I wanted to? Notice, Jesus answered, you could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Why was Pilate ruling in Rome? Who placed him there? God placed him there. Jesus is saying, you wouldn't have any power unless God had placed you there. So did Jesus recognize the legitimacy of the civil power? Yes, he did. Did he recognize the legitimacy also of the religious power? He most certainly did. Now, why did Pilate deliver an innocent man? John 19 and verse 12 tells us the reason. Actually, there are two reasons. Number one, because he was afraid of the people. And number two, he was afraid of losing his political position. He was afraid that Caesar would remove him. So out of expediency, he delivered an innocent man. Notice John 19, verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks what? Speaks against Caesar. So what are they saying? They're saying, listen, this man said that he is a king, and if you don't do something about it, we're going to tell Caesar, and Caesar is going to remove you from your post. So it was because of fear of losing his political position that he delivered an innocent man. But it was also because the religious leaders pressured the people to ask for the blood of Jesus, and he was afraid of an insurrection and a tumult among the people. Notice Matthew 27, verse 20. Folks, the dangerous figures in this are not the common, ordinary church members. The dangerous people here are the religious leaders. Notice Matthew 27 and verse 20. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and what? That they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. Notice John chapter 19, verses 13 through 15. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, behold your king. And now notice this. But they cried out, away with him! Away with him! crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. Do you know what they were doing? They were actually divorcing Jesus Christ as their king. By saying that they had no king but Caesar, they were committing a terrible act of fornication with the king to destroy Jesus Christ. And by the way, lest you wonder about this, did Jesus many times give parables where he spoke about his desire to marry the people in his day, his church? Yes. He called John the Baptist the friend of the bridegroom, the matchmaker, if you please. In fact, he said, how can you cry when the bridegroom is in your midst? He spoke of himself as the bridegroom. He gave the parable of the 10 virgins, which is a marriage. He spoke about the king and his servants, Matthew chapter 22. In other words, this was Jesus trying to woo his people and say, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be your husband. I want you to be my wife. And what did they say? They said, we will not have you as king. We have no king but the political system. We have no king but whom? Caesar. They were disowning their relationship with Jesus Christ. They were breaking their relationship. They were basically divorcing Jesus Christ. And by the way, when they did this, this led to national apostasy, which eventually led to national ruin. You see, they thought that by killing Jesus, they were going to save their nation. But by killing Jesus, they brought destruction upon their nation. They caused just the opposite of what they thought they were going to cause. By taking over the political system to destroy Jesus, they brought about what they wanted to prevent. Notice John chapter 19, verses 41 to 44. John 19, 41 to 44, speaking about the destruction of Jerusalem because the Jewish nation had said, we don't want this man. We don't want him to be our husband. We have a king who is Caesar. His blood be upon us and upon our children. Notice, now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you. This is the Romans, by the way. The very ones that they said the Romans will take away our nation, the Romans did take away their nation. But because they destroyed Jesus. Verse 43, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Do you see what happens when the church fornicates with the state? The result, automatic result, is persecution. Sooner or later, when the church abandons its relationship with Jesus, its spiritual mission, and it tries to get the state to do what Jesus should do, that's fornication. And it leads to the downfall of the church. Now, I'd like to bring this to a close by saying that Pilate should never have delivered an innocent man. Some people say, well, he was the political ruler, he didn't know any better. He did know better. You say, how do we know that? Matthew 27 and verse 19. Matthew 27, verse 19. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, that is Pilate, his wife sent to him saying, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. What was the counsel to the civil ruler? Don't touch him, because he's a just man. He has not violated any of the laws of Rome, and the accusations against him are false. And yet Pilate, because the multitudes were clamoring because the religious leaders said, come on, ask Pilate to crucify him. And because he was afraid of losing his political position, he delivered an innocent man, and he feigned like it wasn't his fault by washing his hands. Notice Matthew chapter 27 and verse 24. When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. But the Bible says that the time will come when these scenes will be repeated again. And so we must let people know. We must let our politicians know that they should not repeat the same mistake that was committed by Pilate. Because God will not accept any hand washing as an excuse for union of church and state and persecution of those who are followers of Jesus Christ. So it's my prayer that we will share these things and that we will choose to be on God's side and to help His spiritual kingdom to grow.